Hey guys, how's it going? All right, today I have something special for all of you, something that a lot of people have been requesting for quite some time, which is a deck tech. The first in hopefully a long line of deck techs to showcase the various decks that you see me playing online, which I actually have built entirely in their paper versions as well. And I think without failure, I have every card that I have online, including some of the more rare stuff, as you will see. But we're going to start with the deck that I think is, if I have a signature deck in EDH, it's this one, Nin the Paint Artist, blue-red deck that I built. I think it's probably my third or fourth deck that I actually built online, and it's gone through countless iterations. It's probably 25 or 30 cards different now from the original version, but the fundamentals of the deck are the same. It's based around this incredibly strong blue-red general. For those who aren't necessarily familiar with her, although I doubt that that's the case if you've watched my YouTube channel. One blue and one red, a 1/1, seems humble, but it has this ability of X, blue and red, tap, Nin the Paint Artist deals X damage to target creature. That creature's controller draws X cards. Seems fairly innocuous and seems like a high price to pay to shoot your opponent's creatures to kill them. However, she has the added ability of being able to target herself. And because she only costs 2 mana, you can chain cast her and use her as basically an instant speed brain geyser to grind your opponent down relatively quickly or draw huge amounts of cards whenever you draw a fast mana ramp draw. And because most of the decks that I design and build in EDH tend to be very high mana decks, Nin the Paint Artist really flourishes in that environment and can very quickly take down a single opponent just through an avalanche of sheer counters, and actually does quite well in a multiplayer game too, as long as you're able to get the general under the table and get an activation or two off with it. I've got the entire deck sorted by mana cost and alphabetically, so I am just going to go through every single card in here, and afterward, if you're still curious about a specific deck list, you're welcome to request that by messaging me in my YouTube channel, and I'm happy to provide that via email. But here we go. I'm going to talk about individual cards whenever they're notable and skip through the ones that are obvious, like basic land. So let's say the general. First land, Ancient Tomb, which is, to me, this is an obligatory card that goes in basically every EDH deck that you build. The 2 life loss is a tiny consequence compared to the advantage that you get from having 2 mana on turn 1, giving you the ability to play all the 2 mana artifacts, and allows you to just develop a little bit faster and get ahead of your opponent, especially when you go second. It's basically just like a 0 casting cost Soul Ring with a minor drawback that is usually negligible. Next land, Bloodstained Mire. I'm running a total of 6 fetch lands in the deck, and I'm not 100% sure that that's the correct number. It just feels right to me. And as far as fetch targets go, I am running 2 devoted targets that only fetch mountains, the Bloodstained Mire and a Wooded Foothills, which of course could be the other red fetchers. It doesn't really matter. However, because I have 3 targets total, I rarely get in a situation where I have a mountain fetcher and no target for it, although that does happen, especially once the Crucible is running. But I think 6 is probably the right number. I would definitely not use 7. However, if at some point in time Wizards were to print another fetchable blue-red land, and I have assurances from Mark Rosewater that that will happen at some point in time, it's just a matter of when, it may be worth going up to a total of 7 fetches, but 6 works for the time being. Cascade Bluffs. This is a card I added fairly recently, and I had no reason to add it before because the deck didn't contain any cards in it that cost red. And without the ability to, or the need to make red, simply going with a land that has this clunky elements to it, requires a colored activation, just didn't make any sense. It was basically strictly worse than an island in almost all cases, or at least a blue-red dual land. But when I added Chandra, Torch of Defiance to the deck, it made a lot more sense to run with a red dual land, and that's why I'm using it. I've been quite happy with it so far. Command Tower, this one doesn't need an explanation. It just goes in every EDH deck. Second fetch land. All right, the basic land. I have a total of 13 basic islands in the deck, and this is a number that I've kind of tinkered and monkeyed around with from time to time, and I feel like 13 is just about right. I would be very reluctant to go lower, at least in 1v1 games, because the deck's very dependent on islands. It's very blue mana hungry, and if you dilute the deck by adding more dual lands, like for example, I'm not using City of Brass, you risk the chance of not being able to utilize Veldican Shackles, which is one of the key cards in the entire deck. So I think 13 is about right. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. This is some old, I think these are original Portal basic islands. They're kind of groovy. All right, Mana Confluence. This is the City of Brass equivalent that I'm using right now. It's just strictly better than City of Brass because if it does get tapped for some other reason, like underneath or with an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth in play, or a couple other things like not that I would have it in play, but potentially the Chromatic Lantern, it doesn't deal damage to you unless you actually use the activated ability. So that makes it just a strictly better city. And I am using it because this is a second card that I included when I added Chandra Torch of Defiance to the deck, just to add a little bit more red. Mishra's Workshop. This is a card that is obviously incredibly powerful and one of the more expensive cards in EDH. It's probably in the top 3, actually, at this point in time. And if you were building the deck and were budget conscious, Mishra's Workshop is one of those cards that you could probably do without. It's just an extra layer of insanity that you can give yourself in terms of openings that just give you a dominant board position. It's obviously completely insane when you start with this card into a Coalition Relic. I'm no longer running the Worn Power Stone, so its power is diluted by a little bit, but it also allows you to accelerate into crazy draws with Gilded Lotus and Thran Dynamo too, and it's just way, way too strong not to use if you have access to it. There's a third fetch land. There's a basic mountain, which is the one lone basic mountain. And one of the things I actually have seen from other Nin the Pain Artist decks when I've run into them online is that they tend to play too many basic mountains. I'm nearly certain that one basic mountain is exactly the right number, and even a single one doesn't even make sense unless you're running the full suite of 6 fetches. That said, a single basic mountain is kind of useful in a pinch to be able to fetch if both of your blue-red duels are out and have been destroyed or something else like that. But having the ability to fetch red mana is still pretty important. So I'm running that. There's another blue fetcher. There's the Reliquary Tower. This card is, I don't think this is one of the least mandatory cards in the deck. It definitely has a win more component to it. That said, especially in multiplayer, the ability to hold more than 7 cards in your hand can sometimes be incredibly important, and especially when you're running with a Forbid lock. I've had plenty of games where I have a ton of mana in play, and because of Reliquary Tower, I'm able to control 2 or even 3 players with a single copy of Forbid. And it's all thanks to Reliquary Tower and its newest cousin, the Thought Vessel. But I think that the maximum hand size, or the lack of maximum hand size limit, is a small price to pay for a single colorless land, given that you don't really have to pay much more beyond that. So I think the Reliquary Tower is probably worth using, and I'm pretty happy with it. Another fetch land. Shivan Reef. This one's kind of a no-brainer. It's just a pain land that doesn't... So it's kind of like it's basically the same as Mana Confluence, but you can get colorless mana out of it for free. So it's just a strictly better Mana Confluence. Steam Vents. Obviously mandatory fetchable blue-red dual land, one of the most important lands in the deck. Strip Mine. Incredible versatility and the ability to utterly crush and cripple a single opponent, especially when combined with the Crucible of Worlds, which is very fetchable. Strip Mine is non-negotiable and is an auto-include in pretty much every EDH deck, barring the super, super combo-y fast versions. There's Sulphur Falls, which is most of the time a Volcanic Island in this deck. It's very rare when you're unable to play it and have it come into play tapped. That said, it does happen, but the relatively small drawback is a small price to pay for that kind of flexibility for an untapped dual land. The Volcanic Island, of course, the best single mana producing card or colored mana producing card in the deck. Ultimately fetchable, doesn't have any drawback associated with it at all, and is a good example of how insane lands were way back in Magic's heyday. This is a beta Volcanic Island from my original collection as one of the pieces of my old Type 1 deck, the deck from ages ago. Wasteland, almost as flexible as Strip Mine. And another auto-include, and can usually just devastate somebody if you combine with Crucible of Worlds. But having a Wasteland and a Strip Mine effect, I think, is very important. There are enough nasty lands out there like Gaia's Cradle and Ancient Tomb and Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, and Cabal Coffers, and a bunch of other nasty non-basic lands that you need to be able to destroy. So Wasteland is also non-negotiable, especially in the control deck. Wooded Foothills. That is, I believe, the last dual land in the deck, and is my other non-blue fetch land. So in case you're counting, that's a total of 32 land, which I believe is the perfect number for how the deck is currently set up. Okay, moving into the 0 casting cost cards. I have Everflowing Chalice, which I don't see played too often, but this card really, really shines in the Pain Artist. It's particularly amazing when you draw it with Crucible or with the Mishra's Workshop, and is incredibly strong off Mana Vault as well, and does crazy things when combined with Tezzeret late in the game. But the fact that it's scaling, its scalable mana development has tremendous synergy with Nin the Pain Artist. Often the ability to play it for 3 or even 4 mana can really, or to produce 3 or 4 mana, can really seal up a game. And it obviously has the flexibility of just providing 1 mana when cast on turn 2. And I would say that I cast this card for just a single kicker, I don't know, at least 80%, 90% of the time. But that said, it does have the ability to scale if the way that the game is unfolding makes that prudent. Don't be afraid to cast it for just 1 counter, though. Mana Crypt, #1 most powerful card in all of EDH. I've ranted endlessly about this card online, and certainly deserves that rightful place. It is more powerful than Sol Ring, and it's probably my fetch target with the cards in my deck that fetch artifacts or 0 casting cost artifacts. I would say I get it over 90% of the time. This card has a drawback, but the drawback is so negligible compared to the upside that it gives you. It's insane. This card would be #1 on cards that I would ban from EDH if the 1v1 match or just the balance of the format were a primary consideration. So yeah, if you're interested in building a top tier competitive EDH deck, this card is non-negotiable. It is the most important card that you need to own, at least in terms of a card that doesn't cost, or that costs more than a couple of dollars. And fortunately, it was reprinted recently and has dropped in price by, I think, about 60 or 70% of its original cost, and is now quite affordable if you get that ugly new version. Mox Diamond, another excellent card in this deck that allows you to accelerate ahead of your opponent. I try to build all of my decks with a critical mass of ways to either match or get ahead of a fast mana draw from my opponent. Because one of the easiest ways to lose with any deck, and especially with a control deck, is when your opponent just develops fast and you're kind of on the back foot, and things like 3 mana counterspells just become terrible when you're behind, because you have no ability to take back the board and you have to continuously tap out to keep up, which means all the counters in your hand just do nothing. And Nin the Pain Artist runs so many counters in the first place, you cannot afford to fall behind. And Mox Diamond's one of those cards that allows you to not only get ahead of your opponent quickly, but also to just bury them in an avalanche of very fast mana development. And the fact that it does cost a card from your hand is made up for easily with a single activation of the General, because the deck has so many card advantage engines to begin with. Mox Diamond is excellent. There's its buddy, the Mox Opal, which is a legendary artifact. Never forget that, in case you feel like cloning it or one that your opponent casts. But I actually fetch this card all the time with Trinket Mage, mainly because by mid-game I usually have enough colorless mana that I don't need more, and having the ability to produce more blue or red is often really handy and better than just getting more colorless mana off of a Sol Ring or a Mana Crypt. So I get Opal all the time, get it with Tezzeret as well. It's a great target to fetch with Tezzeret the Seeker, and all around amazing, amazing card. Pact of Negation, the first counter I have shown you so far. And this is a card that I take out in an instant when I play in multiplayer. So if I have an entire sideboard for the deck right here, which I will be showing you later on. That said, Pact of Negation is extremely strong in 1v1. It allows you to just take risks, tap out on your main step if you need to, and still have defense. And I think the flexibility of that makes it worth it. I think this is definitely a card that I'm kind of on the fence about. If they were to print another really dependable, good 2-mana counterspell, I think I would probably include that over Pact of Negation, but it's probably better than nearly all of the 3-mana counters just because of the flexibility. And I think that's enough to merit inclusion. It certainly shines the most in combo-oriented decks that are trying to win in one turn, but it gives Nin an extra layer of defense and flexibility that I think is worth it. Misdirection is another card that you might consider running in the slot instead if you have that. I would probably use Misdirection over Pact of Negation online, and it maybe should be in the paper version. Unfortunately, Misdirection is one of those weird fluky cards online that has only been printed once, and it was printed many years ago, a dozen years ago or longer, and actually happens to be one of the most expensive cards online. So I can't justify spending $150 online for a card that costs only a couple dollars in real life, which is why I don't have Misdirection online. And because this is a clone of my online deck, I have Pact instead. Brainstorm, this one needs no explanation. One of the best card drawing spells ever printed. Is an auto-include in basically any deck with blue and EDH. Expedition Map. This card is tremendous flexibility, the ability to go get colored mana source, usually a Scalding Tarn, or to get Ancient Tomb in the early game. Of course, it allows you to also fetch Strip Mines and set up Strip Mine lock with Crucible of the Worlds off of one of the many, many fetch targets to get Crucible. So I think the flexibility of Expedition Map more than makes up for the fact that it's a bit slow. And I like this card quite a bit in Nin. Mana Vault, this is just one of those insane old cards from Alpha, although this is one of the few white border cards in the deck in my paper version. And this card is ridiculous and allows you to get completely insane fast starts with things like turn 2 Tezzeret the Seeker, or turn 2 Gilded Lotus into Phyrexian Metamorph into other craziness. Mana Vault, absolutely broken and insane. It's not quite as good as Crypt and Sol Ring, but it sometimes enables even more crazy starts and is an auto-include. Mystical Tutor, this card is absolutely amazing, flexible tool to have. Allows you to get some of the key cards to come back from disastrous situations. There's many, many videos of me crushing people with Mystical Tutor into Amnesia, or Mystical Tutor into Rolling Earthquake, or Vandal Blast. Very frequently I'll tutor for a mana drain in the early game just to constrain my opponent and to make them think very carefully about what spells they play, and the added flexibility of the fact that you can often Mystical Tutor in response to a Nin activation to go get something critical. Just an all-around insane card. Gets Force of Will all the time. Auto-include. Ponder. Fantastic, flexible, cheap spell that allows you to... main reason that this card's so good, along with Preordain, is that they give you a much wider range of keepable hands. I've kept tons and tons and tons of 1-mana hands because I have Ponder in them, figuring the chances of not seeing a mana source in effectively 4 cards off of a Ponder is